Everyone, welcome to Know Your Tests, your SAT, ACT guide. This is our Compass Series event. I think it's our first one for the year, so I'm really happy you guys are able to join us today, whether it's from the United States or from Indonesia. So good morning to everyone in Indonesia. Thank you for waking up and joining us today. Um, but yeah, today is going to be just a little overview of what standardized testing looks like in the United States and what that sort of entails for the college admissions process. And we have two lovely speakers with us today. So I hope you get excited. So I'm just going to share my screen really quickly so we can start. Um, yeah, so a little bit about myself. Before about myself, a little disclaimer, this session is just an informative sharing session based on the experience of students, and PERMIAS Nasional is not affiliated with any SAT or ACT testing centers in Indonesia or in the United States. Another thing is that please be respectful to the speakers, moderators, and other members of the audience when commenting in our YouTube chat. So please keep that in mind. A little event agenda to go today. I'm going to introduce myself as well as the speakers, and then we're going to have a little main session, which is a Q&A portion. We have prepared a few common questions that people might have regarding the SAT, ACT process. And then at the end, you guys also have time to put in your questions in the chat as well as cover some of the questions that were put into the registration form. So a little bit about myself. I will be moderating today's event. My name is Gabby. I am a sophomore at the University of Connecticut, and I'm majoring in molecular and cell biology. A little fun fact about me is that I have a slight obsession with tempeh. That's, I think, important for people to know. Now we're going to introduce our very lovely speakers. We have two wonderful ladies joining here with me today. And first we have Kelly. So share with us who you are and maybe a fun fact. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, my name is Kelly. I'm a finance major at UT Austin. I'm a sophomore. And a fun fact, I guess, I've been trying to cook Indonesian food. But yeah, I also have an obsession with tempeh, so I'll high five you on that. Yeah.
Yes, we can settle the debate. Is tahu or tempeh better? You guys can decide on that. Thank you, Kelly. Our next speaker is Celine. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Celine. I'm a statistics and data science major with a minor in data science engineering at UCLA. And just to add on the fun facts that Kelly and Gabby mentioned, I just made tempeh, so
Very nice. Okay, so um that's all about us. We are now going to go into a little SAT, ACT overview just for those people who aren't super aware of it. I think our main goal for this event is for you, Indonesian students to sort of think about considering SAT or ACT in their application process. And so SAT and ACT are two different kinds of standardized testings that a lot of college admissions use in the United States. And so, how do they differ? SAT has two sections. It has a reading and writing section and a math section. As of right now, the current SAT format is 64 minutes for the reading and writing section, which consists of two 32-minute modules with 54 questions. And for the math, it's two 35-minute modules with 44 questions, with a score range of 400 to 1600. For the ACT, we have a lot more sections here. We have an English section for 75 questions, a mathematics section for 60 questions, a reading section for 40 questions, a science section for 40 questions, and an optional essay. And you do have to write one optional essay. I did not include it here, but I believe that the ACT is over 36, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I did not include it here, my bad, but that is the comparison between SAT and ACT. Um, our two speakers here today only took the SAT, so they will be sharing a little bit more on that. And I think SAT is the more commonly used one. I know a lot of Indonesian students gravitate more towards SAT. And so, but feel free to put your questions into the chat later today. So, two things that we need to sort of like differentiate are test optional schools and test required schools. And why is this important? So over the pandemic, many schools have turned into test optional schools because they saw like how inaccessible it was to find testing centers and to actually carry out the exam like in person. And so they've gravitated towards that. And so a lot of us who are currently in college right now did not have to take the SAT. And then now, as things are getting better, some schools are choosing to stay test optional, but some are going back to being test required. And this really, there is no criteria. Schools just choose it out of their own preference. And so test required schools expect applicants to submit scores as a mandatory part of their application, whereas test optional schools don't require to submit scores unless the applicant feels that this will strengthen their application. And so the next slide is actually a few, like a small list of some of the schools that have returned to test required, specifically for the upcoming 25-26 cycle. And so some big name schools, Harvard, Brown, MIT, Stanford, UT Austin, and there's a whole list that you can look for online. But I guess the best way to check if your school is test optional, test required, it goes back to your the requirements on the admissions page of your school. So I would highly recommend if you're trying to make a list of schools for um, that you're planning to apply to, make sure you really read through the requirements page thoroughly so you know whether they are test optional, test required, and when you should probably plan to take the SAT should you decide to take it. So that's, I think, enough of me talking about the SAT, ACT overview. We're going to get into some questions and we're going to have Kelly and Celine sort of talk about their experience. So our main session is going to start off with, and you guys can chime in at any point, whoever wants to start, feel free. Um, but obviously, why did you decide to take the SAT in the first place? What sort of, maybe you can share about how you narrowed down the schools you wanted to apply to, or like, did someone encourage you to do so, or was it out of your own initiative? Feel free to share. So maybe we can have Kelly first.
Okay. I can share. So for me, I think it was kind of because my brothers also took the SAT. They were all going to the US. So like I thought that the default was just if I want to go to university directly, like not through a community college or anything, like SAT was kind of the way to go. And especially because I was not from an international school, I thought that it would be a good way to like add on my applications. Also at that time, I think I thought about taking it before school started being like, oh, it's not required because of COVID. So I just kind of like, okay, I'll just study for it in case, just to like help my applications.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking for it, I guess. And I think with Celine, we could see earlier that you went through the community college route, which is really common nowadays, but it's not common for a lot of people to still take the SAT with that. So do you want to share a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, of course. So as a freshman, I applied to both universities and community college because I wasn't really sure of my plans at the time. And some of the universities that I applied to required SAT or suddenly turned test optional because of the pandemic. So I took the SAT in preparation for that.
Cool. Yeah, so do you guys want to share a little bit about like what made like how you narrowed down your schools? Like were you intentionally looking for schools that were test optional. Like I know some people I'm like, oh, if they're I'm gonna make my whole list of schools test optional because I don't see the need to be taking SAT. But like, how'd you narrow down your schools for application cycles?
Mm.
Um, oh,
Oh,
Kelly,
you
go
go
ahead.
first. Oh, okay. So I think for me, like I kind of knew what major I wanted to be in. I was kind of like gravitating towards finance or just like business in general. So I just at that time just kind of like searched for like schools in the US that are good for business. And then I kind of narrowed it down after that, but I knew that a lot of the good schools, they all wanted SATs, or at least if I didn't have SAT, I felt like I wouldn't be such a compelling candidate because technically, if looking from the university perspective, if you're picking up international students, it doesn't really make sense sometimes to kind of like compare the curriculum in the US and the high school curriculum in Indonesia. So I was like, okay, I guess SAT is just like a helper in that sense. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Selena, anything you want to add, or how it was different for you?
Yeah, I definitely do agree on that. I think the SAT, I also came from a high school with a national curriculum, so it can be a good measure or feel for like how you would do compared to like US high school students.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that a lot of you guys, if you guys are applying, that's something you can consider because not everyone um I think we can definitely see the difference between the high school system in the US and in and the diversity in Indonesia. So you might want to consider that if you are thinking about taking the SAT. Okay, so now a bit more of the practical side of your experience. What steps did you take for the to prepare for the exam? Like when did you decide when in your high school you were like, okay, it's about time? Did you take it multiple times? I know some people had to retake it. So yeah, maybe we have Kelly first to share. Oh, sorry, not Kelly. Celine first to share, my bad. Yeah.
So I took it around 11th grade or 12th grade, and my test actually got canceled twice. So I wasn't really sure if I was gonna take the SAT because they kept canceling like maybe 2 weeks before the exam. But basically how I prepared was doing a lot of practice problems. And for the math sections, English I did a lot of reading and analysis because I think those are two skills that are pivotal to doing that specific section. For math, I think the high school curriculum that I um went through equipped me with like the skills for the math section. So I didn't really, I just went over a lot of like practice problems, what they required, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, if Kelly, you have something similar, do you also want to touch like, do you see a specific format to the SAT? Where do you see it sort of differ from like, I guess, Indonesian testing systems or like the sort of exams you would get in a typical national high school?
hmm so I think my process is kind of similar with Celine, like a lot of practice problems. I think the difference is that I kind of wanted to start it earlier on so that in 11th grade I didn't have to like worry about it as much. But I guess the way it differs from Indonesian testing, or maybe just like English tests in general, is that SAT is, as Lynn said, like more analytical. Like you can't just like read it one time and kind of be like, oh, it's definitely A. Like you have to actually understand what it's talking about. And a lot of the languages that they use, especially in the history passages, were like very old readings. So you just kind of have to like practice a lot and like adjust with the language. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big distinction for those who are like looking into taking it. Practice problems are always something if we see a very common pattern in a different type of testing. I think the only way for you to adjust is to like repetitively get yourself used to the format. So yeah, that's a great tip, guys. Um, so going back to the whole test optional, test required, share a bit about whether your school was test optional or test required, and did you use it for a university application, or in what way did you use it in your university application? Um, Kelly, would you like to start?
Okay, so I think for UT Austin, it was not test required when I applied because at that time it was after COVID, so they were kind of like you can put it and but if you don't, like it's fine. Because I've seen like some of my friends, they don't really use their SATs, like the people that are from the US. But I think now they're going into test required again. So I think it's like kind of important if you want to apply to some of the big universities now.
Yeah. Celine, any differences or any similarities for you?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of uncertainty during the pandemic, so most of the schools that I applied to were test optional, and community college is also obviously test optional. Um, but yeah, I think the SAT, what how it helped during the application was, as we previously mentioned, I think it's a good benchmark for international students. Um, And then I feel like you can use it as a proof of English proficiency as well, I think, for some schools. So that is, you know, s- another way that the SAT can be useful.
Nice. So, because you guys applied at test optional seasons, do you think it benefit you like as a student? I guess you guys were sort of mentioned like it's a good benchmark and you could probably use it as credit, but like maybe like for the I don't know, maybe the math sections or like the readings, like did it help you in understanding any certain courses better in because I know like in the US we have like general education requirements that are outside of our major, and the SAT sort of covers like those generalized like topics that everyone has to take in their first few years of college. Do you think it helped you in any certain way in terms of like understanding or like adjusting? Because I think topics can be pretty different from back home in the US.
Yeah, I think in terms of the English section of the SAT, it requires a lot of reading, a lot of analysis, a lot of like, oh, what does this text mean? Or what does the author allude to? And I think having practice through that, like all the practice papers that I did was certainly very helpful in like my GE classes, my English GE classes, in which I had to write essays to dissect an author's thoughts, and like, the skills just kind of carried over pretty smoothly.
Nice. How's it like for you, Kelly?
Mm. Yeah, I agree on like the English side. I think it's very useful because a lot of the readings in college, I feel like can be complicated, especially if it's kind of like those English classes or like maybe sociology, history. Like they have a lot of readings. So kind of having like the framework of how to analyze the passages, it's really helpful and it makes you like read so much faster, I think.
That's cool. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something you can all consider when it comes to, I guess, a more um like how it can benefit your knowledge and less about like how it can benefit your admissions. So yeah, if you guys want to think that far into what how the SAT can impact your overall university experience, I think these two lovely ladies have encapsulated that very perfectly. And so, this next question would be, what was your biggest challenge while preparing for the SAT, and how did you overcome it? Celine, would you like to start? My
Yeah,
bad.
sure. I think as Kelly already mentioned earlier, there were a lot of like historical text that we had to parse through. Like it would be a treaty from like 1870. We had to, answer questions about that. And I, well, I personally didn't find the vocabulary hard to understand, but like as a cohesive text, I wasn't sure of all the like the legal jargon and everything.
Mm,
So I think just really having a lot of practice with the practice papers, I might have done like, I don't know, a lot, 50 more, I don't know. But yeah, I think the that was particularly very helpful, and I got um help from other people as well, just to dissect the text and like understand. And yeah, there certainly is a pattern when it comes to the SAT that when you do the papers enough times, you'll be able to get better at it.
mhm. Absolutely. Any thoughts, Kelly?
Yeah, I think so too. Especially like you need to practice with like the time and
Yeah.
like kind of practice as if you're like actually doing the test sometimes. Because I feel like when I read or like do the math problems, I'd be like, okay, I can do it. But then I look at the time and I'm like, oh, I'm way over time. So it's good to like kind of time yourself and practice a lot because
No,
you'll get
yeah.
into it somehow.
No, yeah, it's important. How long did actually guys did it take you guys to prepare? Like, I know you guys mentioned you started like junior, senior year in high school, but like, how long did it take you to prepare until you finally took the exam? Like months? What did it look like?
Um, I think for me, I started kind of like ninth grade, but it was not like intensive, like just
I see.
SAT. So I did like um just just kind of like try to know like what it's like. But the constant practice was, I guess, like high school, like 10th grade, 11th.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, I don't recall how long I took preparing for it. Probably sometime around 3 to 9 months because my tests keep getting delayed and lost in that timeline. But yeah,
Yeah, so I think people can also keep in mind like when to sort of prepare for that. It's definitely preparation time is gonna look differently for different people. And so yeah, take it at your own pace and I think it's also important to look into your deadlines for your applications before, like way before you're about to take it. So you're actually setting time to like prepare yourself, take the SAT, and then use those scores if you are going to submit them. Especially if you're doing any like early action or early applications. Like keeping your deadlines in check is gonna set you up for success, I think. Yeah. Um, Next. So, oh, okay, another question. Is memorizing the questions and answers a good strategy to take this test? Like, like, I think this goes back to a pattern or like format situation. Do they ever reuse questions? Is it, yeah, maybe talk a little bit more about the format because you guys seem to be like experts here. You guys have basically like worked your way into every single paper you could do before you took the test. So let's talk a bit about the format. Maybe Celine, you want to start?
yeah, I feel like coming from again a high school with a national curriculum background, I feel like a lot of the tests are based on like rote memorization,
Yeah.
which I don't think will get you far in terms of the SAT. Um, I don't I'm not sure. I don't think they repeat like um reading text or like math problems. So I think what I meant by like going through the practice problems a lot was that you get a lot of practice with this with the kind of skills that you need to do the questions. I think, for example, with English, of course, it comes back to like reading and understanding and like analyzing a text. But with math, it can be something as simple as like, oh, okay, maybe I lack a bit in like algebra or like maybe I lack a bit in like calculating the volume of something. So yeah, I think by going through these problems, you can sort of, this is where I'm doing good at. This is where I'm doing bad and I can improve. So that was honestly just my strategy. Just figure out the problems where I was having uh difficulty doing and improving before the test.
Perfect.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think the math section, there's definitely a pattern in like the type of questions that they give. I remembered like I made a formula sheet because it was like, oh, there was always be like a circle problem. There would always be this type of algebra question. And it was just like different numbers. But then for the reading, I think the type of questions are similar, but they definitely don't reuse like the passages. So if you
Mm.
just like memorize readings, I mean, if you can memorize every historical passage possible, then like I guess, but it's like
Right.
unreal, like kind of unrealistic if you think of it like that.
Yeah, I think another thing that I'm seeing you guys repeat a lot is like what the English portion comprises of. And I think we can like break that down. Like, is it more of like, is it a grammar? Is it more of like the English language, or are they referring more to like American history, American philosophy? Are they really trying to tailor it to the American experience, or is it just overall English? I think it's also important for us to distinguish the English and the SAT from like the English proficiency exams that we see, like the TOEFL, the IELTS, and I'm not sure if you guys have taken it as well, but those are very like grammar based and very generalized. Like anyone in the world can use that to go to college anywhere, whereas the SAT is very specific to the US. So like what makes the English portion of the SAT like tailored to the American experience, I guess? Um, would you like to start, Kelly?
Okay, yeah, sure. So I think now the reading and writing section is kind of different from when I think me and Celine took it because they changed it into like shorter and the passages are also shorter. But when I took it last time, we had like I think 4 or 5 passages and it's always like one is narrative and or like two are narratives, and then one is social science, one is science based, and one is history. And the way they kind of make the questions are like, oh, how do you think like the author, what do you think the author is trying to convey when he's trying to when he said this in the passage? That's for narrative. But for science, it can be as far as like, oh, in this um in paragraph blah blah, like when he's referring to like a certain short part of the sentence, I guess, like what does he mean? And there would be like the options, and the options sometimes can be so similar that I'm like, oh, okay. But the writing, I think, is kind of like grammar based. So that part is kind of like easier to practice on, I think.
Right. Anything to add, Celine?
Yeah, I mean, I took the IELTS as well because some of the schools required the IELTS, so I just took both the IELTS and the SAT as a catch-all. But the IELTS, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it involves reading, writing, listening, and speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
listening and speaking are definitely sections not included in the SAT. It's just mostly testing your reading and writing. And yeah, just to like add on to what Kelly said earlier about the questions and their format, sometimes there would be things like, oh, given this very unfamiliar word in the text, and what do you think it means? And, you know, in terms of, I think it is partially grammar, but it's also like, oh, how can you infer the context, the meaning of this word from the context surrounding it? Like, of course, we do that in our everyday lives. We see words that we don't really recognize and like, oh, this probably means something based on the words around it. So yeah, I think the SAT is a bit of grammar, a bit of um, English knowledge, but also just critical thinking.
Right. Okay. Thank think we've basically covered or touched base on all points for the format of SAT. I think now it's time we go more into like your personal experience and more of like the practicality of you guys when you guys actually did the exams. Um, so yeah, do you think studying for the SAT was an additional burden on your academics or like when because like when we all applied, like we applied to probably multiple schools at once, and you can imagine how many essays you had to write, and they probably had like even smaller essays to write underneath it. I don't like remembering about the time I applied for college, but do you think that was an additional burden, like having to study for the SAT because it was a very specific route, obviously. So, and how did you manage your academics in high school while applying to that many schools and tackling the SAT? Maybe Celine, you would like to start?
Of
You
course,
could
yeah.
start.
I think my high school journey towards the end, as we all know, was, you know, devastated by the COVID-19 pandemic. So most of the time I had online classes, assignments, and everything. And I think in hindsight, that really helped. Because I don't think I would have survived my high school in person, due to the sheer amount of like academic rigor in every single class. And I don't think in comparison to all of that going on and like, needing to write so many essays, so many prompts, um, so many deadlines, I think preparing for the SAT isn't as gargantuan as these other tasks. I think it's definitely, of course, you have to set some time to, do your practice problems, talk about it with people who are um, experts in navigating the SAT. But yeah, I don't think it was that much of a hurdle in my high school journey because I feel like if you're applying to the US, you have so much going on. Like, it's just, you just have to stick through it.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Anything from you, Kelly?
Yeah, I kind of agree. Like, as long as I think for me, it also helps because I think I kind of knew I wanted to go to the US. So it made me like prepare early for the SAT. So like in a week, maybe I would only like put 2 hours to the SAT kind of. So it's not that much of a commitment considering, yeah, the academics that you do at school and stuff. So I think in that sense, like you should be fine. Like I feel like the essays are way like more brain crunching than like the SATs because you're constantly like reflecting on yourself and stuff. But yeah, I think as long as you prepare early, you should be fine.
Yes. So I hope you guys, if there's one thing you can take away from this conversation, is prepare early, and that will set you up for success. Um, I think another thing that we could ask is, did you guys prepare alone? Like, did you have a lot of friends who were also taking the SAT? Was it helpful to discuss the questions in group settings, or did you think like, oh, I have my personal strategies, those work best for me? And if you want to share those personal strategies, that would be great too. So, maybe we'll start with Kelly this time.
Okay. So I think for me, some of my friends took it, but not a lot. And then I, in high school, I used to go to like this kind of like English course and they would like kind of go over the SAT. And I think that really helps because sometimes when I read like the problems, I get that like I'm wrong, but like I don't know how to like avoid the same mistakes in the future sometimes because yeah, as Celine mentioned before, also like the SAT is kind of complicated. Especially I was struggling in the reading portion because I mean during like my childhood years, I guess like I read English books, but it's not as like comprehensive and as complicated as how they portrayed it in the SAT. So I guess having someone to like discuss it with at that time, I guess my teacher, it really helped.
That's cool. Yeah, absolutely. You can definitely get help from so many different sources, and I think it's definitely okay to ask for help because it's something that's drastically different from what we're studying in Indonesia. Um, Anything from you, Celine?
Yeah, I think I had somewhat of a similar experience. I also took specialized SAT classes at an English course, and I found my teacher very, very helpful. So I think one hurdle if you're, studying the SAT on your own is that you'll find early on that there are not a lot of practice papers available online. Or if there are, there's just gonna be snippets and it's not like the full practice paper and you don't get the answer key and so on and so forth. So I think that the English course and my teacher specifically was very, very helpful. Like I just got a lot of practice problems emailed to me every week. And yeah, I think being able to go over the questions with him and, like I think he taught me a lot in the context of not just, you know, navigating the questions, but like really dissecting the English language and like, okay, so this is this because of this, and yeah, I found that really helpful. And a tip that he told me about that I think was pretty crucial in navigating through the SAT because, as Kelly mentioned, there's a time crunch. And of course, when you're sitting for the actual test, you might, get nervous and like, oh my God, do I have more time? Do I have enough time? Um, for the English section, I found it really helpful to just browse through the questions first before going to the text. Because by browsing through the questions, you sort of, okay, I need to find this information, and I think I can get a feel for it while I'm going through the text. Because, like, if you do it the opposite way, reading through the text and then reading through the questions, you gotta sort of like go back and read the text and, like, okay, so I need to get this from here. But yeah, I think if you're really concerned about time, that was a tip that I found really beneficial.
Yeah, that's apps. Those are really great tips. While we're still on the topic of like study resources, like having a teacher or having friends around you or having enough practice problems to actually practice from, how did you guys like structure your study schedule? I mean, you sort of touched on it, but like, did you have to allocate more time on the English portion or did you have to allocate more time on the math portion? I think it looked different on different people, and so it would be very interesting if you guys could share about this.
I think for me, it's more like the English and the reading portion. But I think now reading and writing is in one section as opposed to like it was
Yeah.
two sections before. So I guess like the English part or like reading and English, those are the ones that I was struggling more. Because I think the math problems, if you start I guess learning for the SAT in 10th grade, maybe some of the concepts you're kind of like unfamiliar with, but by the time that you take it in 11th grade, I feel like if you have like a robust like math curriculum in high school, you'll be able to do just fine in the math section for the SAT.
Okay. Celine, do we agree here? What did it look like for you?
Yeah, I think I also had more practice on the English problems. And I do agree with what Kelly said about the math curriculum. I think whatever curriculum you're enrolled in in Indonesia, whether it be the national curriculum, the Cambridge curriculum, the IB curriculum, I think all of them should cover the basis of what is necessary to do the math section. Like you will do far more complex problems in your high school class than the SAT. But also do not underestimate the math section. I feel like there are some tricky questions that will get you. But yeah, I would, again, I think it goes back to like knowing your strengths and weaknesses and like, oh, do I need to work on my math or English? Because yeah, I think there's no like set standard for how much time or like which one should you allocate more time for. And
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, I think those are great tips. It all comes down to like well, I think Celine put it perfectly, like your strengths and weaknesses. And so you allocate time accordingly to how, I think you learn to build up to it. Like you start with the areas of your weaknesses, and then you finally make time for the ones that you are stronger in. Okay, so I think, okay, this is also a great question. This is more on the actual exam day. Do you have any advice on what to do the night before and on the day of the exam? You guys were touching something, but you get nervous, you're worried about the time management. What did that look like for you? And so maybe you'll have Celine start for this one.
Yeah, of course. I think I don't recall what I did the night before the exam, but on the day of the exam, I was just glad that they didn't cancel it again. Um, but yeah, I think before every important exam, something that I usually do is just like, okay, let's put down the formula sheets and let's put down all the practice papers and just have a moment of zen. Like, let's not think about how you can be, you know, um, just, okay, I need to like literally think about the vocab questions or the writing and like these are strategies that I think at this point you're in for the ride. So I think just having a quiet moment to yourself and just like, okay, this is it. I'm gonna take the SAT and there's nothing to worry about. And at the end of the day, I'm just gonna emerge through it just fine. And I feel like if you walk into something with confidence, that's just gonna make your time worthwhile. So yeah, that's what I did.
Yeah,
That's great. That's perfect. What was it like for you, Kelly?
I totally agree. And one thing is that you should sleep early the day before. It really helps. Like, I just usually sleep early and then I wake up. I'm like, okay, I'm ready for the test. I just do my morning routine, get a coffee. And then once I'm there, I just feel like, okay, like there's nothing else I can do. Like, I've studied my best anyways. So it's just like focus and try to like, I guess control your breathing because I feel like during the day, I see so many people so nervous. Like, they're just like sweating and whatever. And you're just like, try to calm yourself down. And whenever they have like, they usually have breaks in the middle. So usually some people like talk about the test and stuff, but I just recommend just like not think about the ones that you did before and just focus on the next section. And that's like a really helpful tip. And try to not like look so much to your right and left when you're doing the test because it's kind of like distracting sometimes. Because some people they just like flip on like every page so fast that you're like anxious. You're like, I'm not done yet. But it really helps to just like focus on your own thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great tips. And I think you guys even mentioned like this isn't one of those exams where you just like memorize the thing. So there's really no point of you trying to like hold on these practice problems to the very last minute before your exam. And so, as you guys said, if you've already practiced with so much confidence and you've had all the resources that you need, you should be good to go. So you guys answered these questions so beautifully. And so um, we're actually going to move on to our questions in the that were sent in our Google Forms. I think we have a few. We might have already touched base on this, but let's start with what are the best study resources for scoring high on the SAT? Maybe you guys want to start like where you began and then what you finally came to conclusion with. So maybe Kelly, would you like to start for this one?
Okay. So I think the practice problems, I used to like buy this SAT book. I think it kind of helps because they also have like a pretty like comprehensive key answers. So if you do something wrong and you just kind of like look at the answer keys, it really helps in that way. And also I think they have a lot of PSAT problems too online. But I think as Celine said, like if you search for like the free ones, usually they might not be complete and there's only a few online. So I guess like buying like a physical book is also like kind of helpful in that sense.
Yeah. I know the book, the exact book that you're talking about. It's like this thick, has a blue
Yeah.
cover. Yeah, I think
Mm,
that's also a great resource if you're looking for practice problems specifically. I'd also recommend finding teachers in your area that specialize in, helping you prepare for the SAT because I really felt that my teacher was a crucial part in, you know, um, ensuring that I was ready for the exam.
I see. Okay, so study resources are super important, and where you get them are obviously really um, are key to your overall experience and your preparation as well. And so, maybe from a scale of 1 to 10, how difficult was the SAT for you? Like 10 being the most difficult, and 1 was like piece of cake. Um, yeah, let's rate this SAT thing. Maybe Celine can start.
Oh, I'm actually not too sure because if I were to give it a rating, probably be like a 5. Like it wasn't as difficult as I expected it to be. And yeah, I think that was totally because I had a lot of practice and it's sort of, I I think I got the hang of it.
That's good. Anything from Kelly?
I think math was like 5, but reading was like, I guess 7.5, kind
Okay.
of like tricky. And writing was also 5, I think.
Okay, we have pretty similar, like we're in the same range, like 5 to 7.5. That's not too bad. Did you ever find it intimidating in the beginning, like when you were first going to start take the SAT, you're like, it's a big exam. Like, do you think your rating would have been different, like when you started it and finally when you finished taking it?
Definitely, yeah. Because I
Mhm.
think when you first look at the past paper, especially the reading section, because I think the way they did it before was like a long passage, and then you're just kind of like, oh, like half a page, and it's like really tiny like words. You're just like, what does this even mean? Especially the history passages. I was really intimidated. But yeah, as you go through it over and over, I guess it gets better, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, I think early on, so it was sort of like a roller coaster journey where I thought, okay, I think I'm pretty good at English and math. I can do the SAT just fine. I opened my first practice paper and I was like, I cannot do the SAT just fine. So like the stress kind of peaked a bit. And then after all those practice problems, it was smooth sailing and I was like, okay, I think I'm prepared and I'm ready and yeah, let's do this.
Right. Okay. So we're gonna divert slightly, and this is completely based on your experience, but like both SAT and ACT are like big names in the standardized testing world for college admissions. Did you guys ever consider the ACT, or was it ever recommended to you that you guys also take the ACT? I know it's not as common amongst Indonesian students, but it is still accepted for international students. So like what are your thoughts on it? Did you ever consider it? Maybe Celine can begin with this one.
Yeah, for me personally, I never really considered taking the ACT because as I was researching for all the universities that I was going to apply to, I think my choice ended up being the SAT just because it was simpler and um, I already knew like, you know, where to get help for the SAT, which I think these two things are deciding factors at the end as to why I took the SAT.
Okay. So, for Kelly, was it any different for you?
Mm, I guess it's kind of similar. Because I think I was kind of biased also because my brothers took the SAT.
Mm,
But yeah, I haven't heard any of my friends also taking ACT, so maybe it's kind of like uncommon. And I think as you like walk through the list of questions at the sections, like now I know why a lot of people didn't take it. It has way more sections than SAT, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's something worth pointing out. Like, I think going back to one of the slides that we did earlier, like they do have two different components. So if you guys are trying to consider like um which one's for you, I think go back into looking at like different practice problems that they offer online and see if which one is going to give you a good benchmark for the school or for the major that you're aiming for. Because I believe the ACT has a science portion, like a specific science portion. And so if you think that's going to tailor to your needs as you apply for schools in the US, I think it all just comes down to, yeah, make personalizing your overall preparation experience. Um, Okay, some last few questions. Any words for the viewers who are preparing for the SAT right now? It can be tips, it can be like a reminder. Um, maybe Kelly can start for this one.
Okay. I guess try to prepare early if you know what you want already. And yeah, don't procrastinate. And I feel like you guys can do just fine if you prepared enough. And with the tips that we gave, like in terms of the question structures and stuff, I think it also really helps. It helps to try to search for a lot of resources. Try to ask more to like other people. So I think the things that other people tell you might be like really useful in the way like you think about the test and also study for it.
Yeah. I mean, I think a tip would be don't get discouraged by the practice problems if they're harder than you think. They'll get easier, you know. I think both of us have talked a bit about our experiences with that. And yeah, find as many resources as you can. Reach out to your seniors. If anyone wants like more specific advice on the SAT or applying to colleges in the US in general, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always open. Um, and yeah, I think the SAT is just like any other test. Just prepare enough for it and you'll get through it okay. And then at the end of the day, you're not defined by your test score. And yeah, I think whether or not you choose to submit it as a part of your college application, you are a whole other person outside the SAT. You know, you have your high school grades, your extracurriculars, and admission officers always evaluate an application comprehensively. So don't worry too much about the SAT.
Those are lovely, lovely tips. I think just to end off our entire question and answer portion, we are a Compass Series event and we basically help guide students in their application process. So now maybe like any last like general tips for people who are applying for this cycle. And um, you can personalize it to your current university experience or look back into how you were preparing for it. But yeah, just an overall like tip or strategy in applying or preparing for um, college applications in the US specifically. Maybe Celine would like to start with this one.
Yeah, I mean, a huge part of US applications is you will have to write a lot of essays. And as Kelly sort of emphasized earlier, and I will underscore again, start early, especially with your essays. I cannot emphasize how, because sometimes I do help some of my juniors with essay editing, and then, it would be, oh my God, I'm submitting this tomorrow. Could you help me go through it, please? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, didn't I tell you to start early? I think um in terms of crafting your essay, I think it takes so much time because you're worried about getting things right. You're worried about Did I portray myself accurately? And so of course it takes a lot of brainstorming and editing and more editing. And yeah, I would say start early, reach out to people. So there are so many people who came before you that would love to help you and step in. So, and yeah, and best of luck. I know how crazy it gets with essays, especially UC essays. If you are interested in schools like UC Berkeley, UCLA, other schools in the UC system, I think there are four or five, four prompts. So uh, they're like 300 words each. So yeah, just, you know, start early, seek help, and that's about it.
That's great. Beautiful advice. Um, Kelly, anything to add?
I think it's kind of similar. Like ask, especially if you know, like which schools you want to go to and you have like mutuals, or I guess like you can also reach out to the PERMIAS that are in those regions too. Like usually they would want to help you like, oh, what do you think is the best way to like apply and what do you think helps so much? And especially if you're trying to search for which schools will fit you the most, it's good to ask like a lot of people just to be kind of like, oh, like how is it there? Like, um, does it have a lot of resources for like the major that I'm seeking? Something like that. And also, I guess a really important one these days is kind of like having a lot of extracurriculars that you can kind of show in your application. And you don't have to be in like a lot of them or anything, but it's just like you should have one that you're kind of passionate about talking about, because I think that will also be really helpful in framing your essay and trying to, I guess, present yourself better in terms of college application. I think it's useful besides just the whole like grades and GPA.
Yeah, I think just to add on a bit to what Kelly was saying, I think reaching out to people who are already going through whatever school you want to go to can be super helpful to give you like a comprehensive view of what the school is about. Outside of the rankings, outside of how good it is for a major, do people who go there actually like going there? Like, what's the lifestyle like? And, especially, I think that's especially really helpful because I didn't get to visit a lot of the schools that I applied to. So I had no idea what the campus was gonna look like, what people there were like, what the culture is. So I think I did reach out to some people who were in the schools that I was interested in, which was very helpful. And in terms of extracurriculars, I think a lot of people have this misconception that like, oh, I have to be president of every club possible. And, it's not about quantity, it's about, the quality of whatever you're doing. Like, are you passionate about it? Is it like related to your major? That's definitely a plus point if you already know what you want to study early on. But yeah, don't make the mistake of like pouring your time into too many things instead of just like focusing on a couple handful that really do show your passion and time and dedication and hard work into what you want to pursue in the future.
You guys put that so beautifully. You touched every corner of basically the admissions process here. I just like to add, like, you can take advantage of the fact that you're an international student because you have so much more to offer compared to your US peers who are or your the other applicants from the United States. And so thank you so much, Kelly and Celine, for pouring your hearts out and sharing your entire SAT experience as well as your college application experience. And it's just been great talking to you guys. And I think just a reminder for everyone, their handles are available on the Instagram post for this event. So if you guys want to reach out at any point or reach out to PERMIAS National up for anything, regarding academics in the US or other, because we also have other departments like professional development, we are a great resource for you guys to reach out to, and we are more than happy to help. And so, thank you once again to everyone for joining us today. And I hope you have a great rest of your Sunday if you're in Indonesia, or if you're in the US, have a great rest of your night. But yeah, thank you all for coming. We will see you in our next PERMIAS Nasional event.